Hello and welcome to 5-Minute Math. Today we are looking at the 7th grade concept of simple and compound spaces. This is standard 7.6a in the great state of Texas, and we are using item number 8 off the 2018 released STAAR test. If you have not done so already, please go ahead and take a moment to pause the video, work this problem out on your own, unpause it, and then we will look at our answers together. So Jack is tossing a coin 3 times. So which tree diagram shows all the possible outcomes of the coin landing heads up or tails up? So which is standard coin, and you've got heads or tails. Now this is a compound space, a simple event in probabilities when there's one possible outcome. Flipping a coin, heads or tails. Compound is when it's 2 or more, so greater than or equal to 2 possible outcomes. In this case, we've got 3 possible outcomes because we're tossing a coin 3 times. So this is definitely a compound event. So let me list out all the possibilities, and then we will find the tree diagram that matches that. So let's just start with heads. So we're going to make a little list here, and I'm just going to put attempt 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to put them in columns. So let's just say that everything is heads. Heads, heads, heads. Right? That is an option. So that's always an option. When we are looking for, okay, what's the next probability? And how do we do it in an organized way so we don't miss something? Well, what we do is we keep everything the same up to the end as long as possible. So can we keep our first and second as heads and change the third toss? Yes. That could be tails. Now, can we keep the first and second heads again and change the third toss? No, there's only 2 options, heads or tails, which means I'm only going to have 2 options for my heads for my first 2. So let's now keep my head on number 1, but I'm going to switch my number 2 to tails. So I can go heads, tails, and then you see a pattern here. I can always go back to heads here. Now I need to keep heads, tails, keep those 2 the same. Is there another option? Yes. There's heads, and then there's tails for the third option. So I've done it 4 times. So are there any other options in which I can keep my first toss as a heads? Well, let me see. I've done my first toss as a heads, and then my second toss as a heads and a tails. And I've kind of done everything I can with my third toss. So this second toss cannot change. There's a heads and there's a tails. There's not a third option. So it looks like I'm out of options for what I can do for a heads, which means I need to just see what happens when I go tails. So let's kind of do the opposite. Let's do tails, tails, tails. Okay? So tails, tails, tails. And then how do I keep my first 2 the same and change the third? Well, I can do tails, tails, heads. So what that leaves us now is changing our second toss to a heads, because that's the only other thing that we can do. So tails, heads, tails, and then tails, heads, heads. And that's going to get us toss 7, and option 8 right there. And so you see that I've got 4 different options here for what happens when my heads are in my first toss. And I've got 4 different options here when my tails are in my first toss. And I've really run out of possible outcomes because I've explored what happens with both of those. And then I've had 2 heads for the second toss for both, and then 2 tails for the second toss for both. So let's see, I've got 8 different options, and let's just see what we have here. So we've got both G and J don't have enough, and we see that we've got here H, heads, 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 tails. So that's looking pretty good on H, heads, 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 tails, heads. And you notice, look at that, F repeats heads both ways, so our answer here is H.